Hello and welcome. My name is Lizzie Shackelford, and I am a senior fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I'm thrilled to welcome you to our program exploring solutions to address the global challenge of climate change. I want to start by thanking the Consulate General of Japan in Chicago for their generous support that made this program possible. We are grateful to Consul General Tajima and his staff. The Chicago Council on Global Affairs is an independent and nonpartisan organization. Views expressed by speakers we host are their own and do not represent any institutional positions. Before our moderated discussion, we have the honor of hearing a keynote message from the governor of Tokyo, Yuriko Koike. Governor Koike, Tokyo's first female governor, has had a distinguished career in Japanese politics. She has also previously served as Japan's environment minister and defense minister. Welcome, Governor Koike.
Hello, everyone. I'm Koike Yuriko, the governor of Tokyo. I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. The aggravated climate crisis shows no sign of slowing down. I want Japan and the United States to jointly lead the effort to decarbonize the world. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government, TMG, has shared its knowledge of urban cap-and-trade programs with New York City. Last September, I talked with Mayor Adams and confirmed that we would work closely together. I also exchanged views with Lieutenant Governor Kunarakis of California. California has already made solar panels mandatory. In April 2025, the TMG will also launch a program mandating that new houses and other buildings be equipped with solar panels. Cities stand at the forefront of global challenges. Last month, we held the GNET's Global City Network for Sustainability Leaders Summit. The mayors and leaders of the 34 cities around the world gathered to discuss and shared knowledge on how to solve common challenges facing cities. As we move forward, let us use the wisdom, technology, and know-how of Japan and the United States to create a sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Now we're honored to welcome Japanese Consul General in Chicago, Hiroshi Tajima, for welcome remarks.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to join today's event on environmental policy and efforts to combat climate change, together with Governor Yuriko Koike of Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and a distinguished speaker, Dr. Donald Wuebbles, Emeritus Professor of Atmospheric Science at the University of Illinois. Climate change is a pressing global challenge that Japan and the United States have elevated as a high priority. Japan and the United States have been discussing various measures they can take jointly. Under President Biden's administration, the political commitment to this issue has grown even stronger. Under the framework named the U.S.-Japan Climate Partnership, launched in 2021, Japan and the United States are closely consulting with each other in order to implement effective domestic policies to achieve their 2050 net zero goals. Let me introduce Japan's effort related to the bilateral commitment. Japan aims to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 46% in fiscal year 2030 from its fiscal year 2013 levels. Japan will continue strenuous efforts in its challenge to meet the lofty goal of cutting its emission by 50%. To fulfill this commitment, the Japanese government has developed an industrial policy called the Green Growth Strategy. The strategy is aimed at creating a virtuous cycle of economy and environment as it pursues carbon neutrality by 2050. First, the strategy promotes a green growth among 14 sectors to transform industry and the broader economy. The 14 sectors include renewable energy sources like wind, alternative fuels like hydrogen and ammonia, and innovative technologies such as carbon recycling. As part of the Green Growth Strategy, Japan has established a Green Innovation Fund of around 19.2 billion US dollars to support the creation of new innovation. The fund will support efforts ranging from R&D to demonstrations to social implementation of the outcomes. Second, ongoing robust efforts by local governments and communities are the driving force of this nationwide decarbonization. 871 local governments, including Tokyo, Kyoto, and Yokohama, are committed to developing and implementing a wide range of plans to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. These local governments represent 125 million people, which is 98.7% of Japan's population. The government of Japan is supporting such local initiatives by providing resources and funds for the decarbonization of their public infrastructures, business facilities, and supply chains. Third, Japan furnishes developing countries with many kinds of assistance, including financial support, capacity building, and technology transfer. These kinds of assistance ensure the developing countries implement sufficient climate change countermeasures. For the financial support, Japan will provide climate finance, both public and private, totaling 6.5 trillion Japanese yen, approximately 60 billion US dollars, over the 5 years between 2021 and 2025, and further enhance assistance for adaptation. With the assistance, developing countries can mitigate potential damages or benefit from opportunities associated with climate change. I hope this background information provides you all with some insights. Thank you very much.
It's now my privilege to introduce our speaker today, Donald Wuebbles. Dr. Wuebbles is the Harry E. Preble Professor of Atmospheric Science at the University of Illinois. From 2015 to early 2017, Dr. Wuebbles was Assistant Director with the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the Executive Office of the President in Washington, D.C., where he was the White House expert on climate science. He has been a leader in a number of international and national scientific assessments, including being a coordinating lead author on several international climate assessments led by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that resulted in IPCC being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. Welcome, Dr. Wuebbles.
Yes, good morning.
So we've heard some positive and inspiring messages today about what cooperation on climate change can achieve. But I want to start with addressing the bad news. A recent UN report had pretty alarming news for the world, assessing that we are likely to pass the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target, that's about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, in about a decade. And staying below that level of warming has long been the climate target because it's the threshold beyond which climate disasters are expected to be so extreme that we won't be able to adapt. It's been a long time coming, but it doesn't really feel like the world has taken it sufficiently seriously, particularly considering things like global oil demand last year being at an all-time high. So I've just got to ask, do you think the world has gotten sufficiently urgent about the climate crisis yet? And if not, why not?
Well, not yet, but I did find it interesting when in the synthesis report that the IPCC decided to emphasize the 1.5 degrees, particularly because just a little over a month ago, I submitted a paper to a journal basically saying the same thing, that we're going to pass 1.5 degrees. And there's no magic about that threshold. I argue that we are already seeing dangerous climate change, and that's going to get more and more dangerous. But it's a good goal to set. And unfortunately, within the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to pass that goal. And so that is not, so when companies or anyone decides that they're going to base their policies on we meeting that goal, that would be a mistake. Now, why is that really an issue for us is because what I said before. We're going to actually see more concerns about severe weather. The intensity of severe extreme weather is increasing, and that's going to further be a problem. So it means more significant droughts, more significant flooding in certain areas, more significant heat waves, and the impacts that that's had on various parts of the world. More severe storms. Hurricanes are getting more intense. So, and the sea levels are rising. And the higher the temperature change, the higher the sea levels are going to rise. So that's, those are all going to have significant impacts on humanity and things we really need to be worried about.
So that goal, I mean, it's a concrete one. It's one that we've had for a while. What do you think, kind of recognizing that we are going to pass it? I mean, do we set a new number that we don't want to get past? Do we pick a different way of measuring, whether we can kind of meet the challenge of today? What would you recommend? How should we frame the challenge moving forward?
Well, first of all, the United Nations back in 1992 established 2 degrees centigrade as kind of the ultimate goal. And that is still reachable. And in the one of the meeting of the parties, I think in early mid 2000s, really made that as the goal. So going into the Paris Agreement, it really was the goal to go 2 degrees. Paris Agreement, where all the countries came together and decided, well, we really got to be doing something about climate change. Decided that, well, let's try to do even better. Let's try to get to 1.5 degrees. So 2 degrees is still there, and we can reach that, but we do have to start decreasing emissions dramatically. And right now we're not doing that, and there's a lot of various, just a lot of forces trying to, mostly for short-term profit, so that we keep burning fossil fuels, and we need to make the transition.
So, this administration talks a lot about climate change, probably more than any administrations before. But if you look at what this administration is doing now, particularly compared to your years in the government, what do you see that they're doing today that's really positive and in the right direction? And what do you think that they should be doing additionally?
So when I was helping President Obama, we were certainly trying to get things moving in the country, and then a lot of that was undone during the next administration. So what's happening now is primarily through the bill that was passed this last year, the Inflation Reduction Act. That is putting us on the pathway to really reducing our emissions, making the transition in our energy and transportation system so that we can deal with this. It doesn't do everything we need, but I think there's a lot of thinking, and I think it's rightful thinking, that if we start making that transition, then the country and other countries around the world will have the incentives in place to make their own transitions, and that we will be able to, once we see that we can move our energy away from fossil fuels, that we can move our transportation systems away from the use of gas and oil, that we can get a lot of gains out of that. Not only more jobs, actually, but also less air pollution and less water pollution. And we did an analysis paper that I published this last year that basically says the many deaths and severe health issues that result from air quality will largely go away if we eliminate fossil fuels.
So climate change is a really big issue of concern among the young people in our country and around the world. What has been the role of the next generation in bringing more attention to the climate crisis? And what advice do you have for next generation changemakers to help bring more effective changes to climate policy?
Well, it's a tough one. In my many public talks about climate change, I always emphasize that our children and grandchildren who are really going to face the issues. It's already here. It's already dangerous, but it's not to the extent it will be. And so I'm happy to see that young people are trying to push things for a happier future for themselves. It's difficult though, and we're all up against trying to deal with special interests that want to keep using fossil fuels, and we just have to keep fighting it.
So Governor Koike delivered a keynote address before this discussion, and her message highlights the role that subnational governments are playing in addressing the climate crisis. How can cities, states, and other subnational entities play a bigger role in climate policy?
Well, Tokyo is one of many cities around the world that are trying to do something very special and seriously about climate change. Chicago actually is another one of those cities, and they are leading the way. That it's the cities and a few states in the U.S. and a few countries that are really trying to make the changes we need to make. The new Chicago Region Action Plan, which I helped develop, is really a clear sign of a major urban area trying to make a difference. And we need the rest of the world to be doing the same thing. And unfortunately, that's not the case in some parts of the world.
Can you talk a little bit more about what Chicago's doing that's unique and promising?
Well, Chicago really is putting a plan in place. It doesn't know how it's going to handle 100% of the goal, but the aim is to be what's called net zero emissions, which means no emissions coming from the use of fossil fuels, basically, by mid-century, by 2050. And it's trying to put things into place that will put us on that pathway. So we have 27 years right now to make that happen. We're going to have to work hard to make it happen, but I think it's doable. And I think having hope and being positive about this is an important aspect of dealing with climate change. And so the plans the city has or the region has, because it's all the cities in the Chicago area that are involved, is really important. And what I'm also happy to note is there's many other cities, in the U.S. and elsewhere that are trying to do the same thing.
So is the cities level somewhere where young people should be a little bit more active? I mean, I personally find that young people don't often think about kind of their local politics to get involved. They pay attention to what's happening at the national level, but is this an area where young people should start really paying attention to who their local leaders are and what they're doing?
I think that's the case, not just for kids in the city. I'm a farm boy from Southern Illinois, and so my community is still very rural, very small towns. My hometown, I grew up on a farm, but my hometown is about 3,000 people, and hasn't changed much over the last 50 plus years since I left. But I want the young people there to be very active in this as well, not just the kids in the cities, but definitely I want the kids to be active everywhere because it's their future.
And how can these kind of subnational and cities efforts better coordinate and align with national government efforts to address climate change?
It's good to start locally and then extend that out. So I think we need to be doing a lot more at the state level for Illinois and for all the other states, and then extending that even further to the nation. We need to go beyond what the Inflation Reduction Act does. And so it's important that everybody buy in, realize that this is not politics. This, climate change is science. It's it's based on facts. It's what's happening. But we can deal with this, and if we could just come together, not only as a nation but as a people on this planet, we can deal with this.
Let's talk about the perspective from the planet-wide position there. How are international efforts to address climate change playing out right now? I mean, this is an event that's focusing on efforts from the U.S. and Japan working together to combat climate change. How do you see these countries cooperating, and how can they work better with other countries in the world to address this shared global challenge?
Well, Japan and the U.S. are both very serious about trying to do something about this. We need all the countries, of course, coming together. And there are many meetings. There's at least one meeting a year trying to deal with those issues. We bring all the countries together. But it's moving very, very slowly. And the countries are not necessarily even abiding by what they promised to do. And that's really a serious problem. When the leadership of China came together with President Obama back in 2015, while I was at the White House, that was an important step in trying to bring two heavily emitting countries, two heavy users of fossil fuels together. China has not yet made major strides in reducing their emissions, but my understanding is that they are in the process of putting in place major changes in their use of fossil fuels. However, other countries like India are not making much progress at all, and that is a very serious issue because we need to reduce the emissions globally, not just what we do locally. And right now, that just isn't happening. We're still basically, in terms of cumulative emissions, essentially right at the high scenario level, which puts us at 4 to 5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. And we haven't seen those kind of temperature changes since the last ice age, when we had about 5 degrees centigrade colder. And we know what difference that made. If you're sitting in Chicago, you have thousands of feet of ice above you at that point. So 5 degrees is a big deal, and we're not prepared for that as a society at all.
I think one of the challenges with getting countries like India and others on board is, the legacy that the United States has produced more kind of collectively over time than other countries have. And so the question is, this is a problem created by, in large part, industrialized countries that have been industrialized for a long time. So how can we make the case for countries like India to make a bigger sacrifice in order to kind of benefit the global good, when their argument is often other countries have already been built up after their kind of long-term access to cheap fossil fuels? So how can you now tell us that we can't use that?
Well, I think it isn't that the need to use fossil fuels; it's the need to build their economies, and as we develop the new technologies, sharing that technology worldwide, and we already have that technology in place, and we know how to use solar and wind and other forms of renewable energy, and we're developing better and better batteries all the time to be able to change our transportation systems largely to battery or possibly to hydrogen and fuel in some cases. Sharing that technology can handle these problems. We saw a similar thing with telephones. Africa did not have telephones for many, many years. Now everyone there has a cell phone because it's available, readily handleable in a country where it's difficult to build power lines or telephone lines, etc. So, or a set of countries, the whole continent. So I feel confident we can deal with this, but yes, we have to all come together to figure out how to make the right solutions.
And you've mentioned the challenge of different political administrations, with the U.S. being at the forefront of a lot of leadership on this right now. But of course, there is concern that a new administration that cares less about addressing climate change could come in the future. How do you think the international community can best insulate itself from political fluctuations in any country in order to ensure that kind of the global trajectory, the international community is kind of forging ahead to address this shared challenge?
Well, as a scientist, it's kind of tough for me to figure out how to deal with that
Tough
issue.
for all of us, I think.
Yeah, well, it is tough for all of us. But yeah, we need to do that. I mean, this has to be beyond politics. This has to be a recognition that we cannot allow this issue to dominate us in the future in the way it could. Imagine. I mean, some of the new science coming out is actually scary enough that we learned in the last few weeks about how in the past, and these are based on observations, that glaciers can be affected both from above and below as the oceans are warming, and we're talking about the very large glaciers that are tied to ocean edges. And so places like Antarctica could lose their ice much more rapidly than we realized it could. And the sea level rise would just destroy many major cities around the world. So we have to realize this is a really big issue, and how it's going to affect all of the, not only our lives, but also our livelihoods and our economies, and need to prepare for this. And we're not doing a very good job at that at this point.
You mentioned China earlier. As we said, the world's two biggest economies, biggest carbon polluters, they're increasingly adversarial on the world stage. I mean, you had reflected on a time years ago when they were coming together more on climate change. But how critical is cooperation between the U.S. and China to rein in climate change? And what outcome is likely if they can't get on the same page and cooperate? And I will just add on to that, how much faith can we have in the fact that it is in, China's national interest as well to address this? Will that be the saving grace for addressing climate?
Well, that's how I was going to respond. That basically every country in the world is being adversely affected by the changes occurring in our climate system. I remember back in the 1970s when I first began to work on this issue, I would have special meetings in the Soviet Union in those days where we had interactions between the U.S. scientists and Russian scientists to talk about climate and environmental issues. And hearing one of the major leaders in Russia or in the Soviet Union talking about that they couldn't wait for climate change because it was to be such a benefit to Russia. But the reality is, yes, some aspects of it are beneficial, warmer so that you can maybe grow more crops. But there's so many other things that are large negatives, coastlines being one of them, that would not be good for them or for any other country in the world. And so you really need to understand that this is a global issue, that this is an issue that affects all of us in very significant ways. I already talked about it being dangerous, climate change, but wait 20, 30 years. Wait and see what our children are going to have to put up with. We really need to deal with this. And so, yes, cooperation is absolutely essential.
What advice do you have for ordinary citizens? What can we all do on our day-to-day basis to help reduce our carbon footprints? And what else can we do in a kind of bigger level to help combat climate change?
In my public talks, I always have a slide on exactly what can we be doing. And yes, there's a lot we can be doing in terms of conserving energy ourselves and actually save money in the process. A lot of simple things, just even light bulbs. If we talk about the past, most people, I think, already started to make those conversions. I know we certainly have. But there's a lot of other things they can do in terms of, if you buy a new appliance, make sure it's energy efficient, et cetera. Or have a vehicle that is more energy efficient. Probably the most important thing any of us can do, though, is to communicate. Let our leaders know how important this issue is. And it doesn't matter whether Republican or Democrat. Everyone needs to recognize that this is an issue affecting us, and it's based on science, not politics. So do that. Vote carefully. Vote with care. Look at how you interact with others. If you have someone or in your family who thinks that this is all political, then, we need to deal with that, and we need to be able to communicate that no, it's just based on what is happening to our Earth system, and that we need to figure out the right solutions. Those solutions, may have political viewpoints behind them, but we can still get to the right solutions.
I have one more question for you, Dr. Wuebbles. What gives you hope when you're looking at, whether it's the city level, state level, international level? What gives you hope that we will be able to do enough to address climate change and preserve our future?
Well, I always look at positively at again, in my public talks, I always end up with a slide about hope, because we have to have that positive viewpoint. Humans have long been able to deal with a variety of issues confronting us, and we can deal with this one too. We have the solutions at hand. It really is just a matter of putting them in place. And yeah, it's difficult, because we're talking about transitioning our entire energy and transportation approaches that we've used for the last century. But we can do this. And so maintaining hope, make sure that we continue down the pathway to get to those solutions is really important. And, we don't want to face the consequences and of not doing something. And so don't lose that sense of hope. Don't get so depressed by this you do nothing. It's really important that we continue on the right pathway.
Dr. Wuebbles, thank you so much for joining us today. I also want to thank Governor Koike and Consul General Tajima for their remarks. And again, thank you to the Consulate General of Japan for their generous support. And thanks to our online audience as well. We look forward to having you join us for future programs at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs.